Hello and welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's show, I have Sam Wale, and Sam is the VP of Production at Alibi Music. He makes music for TV, film, and games. He's got a lot of experience creating music, producing, and working in those types of fields, and I think there's some unique perspectives that come up when you're thinking about producing music for film, for TV, and games. That's might be a little bit different if you're an artist writing your own songs or writing songs for other people. But at the end of the day, it's making music, and it's interesting to find out how we can apply all kinds of techniques from all kinds of styles and approaches to music making. So I'm very excited to talk to Sam. He's written some pretty cool articles around the internet that offer some insight, and I want to go a little deeper with that with him. So Sam, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here, and I've really enjoyed listening to the episodes over the last few weeks as well. So I've been getting a lot from listening to this stuff. So yeah, exciting to try and contribute in my own way as well.
Oh, well, thanks for listening. And this has been my own kind of master, doctorate level course on, not going to get any accreditation for that or anything, but yeah, I learned so much from talking to so many different people, and I'm excited to talk to you. You have a beautiful space that you're working out of.
Thanks. Yes, just a room in my house that is set aside for working. Really, a little studio space that I'm here all day making music, listening to music, mixing, mastering, sound designing, all sorts of stuff. But it's nice to be able to do it from home. I like being able to nip out and check on the baby when I need to, and go and have lunch with the cat. Get myself a coffee.
Right. Yeah, it's got a nice combination of cozy and real, for people that are watching, you can obviously see it, but if you're listening, it's got a couch in the background, nice and cozy, guitars ready to go. And there are, I guess, different schools of thought with how we can work these days. We could go to a studio and go do work and be at a place and then leave. Or we can have it at home where we have that comfort and access. But I think also with that comes the potential for distractions. On the other hand, you can work whenever you want, so you got that freedom. I'm a homebody too.
Yeah, that's definitely an advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so you're working from home as well?
Yeah. I'm in my basement at my house that we've set up nice, and got
awesome.
My dogs.
It looks
are
like
upstairs.
a pretty impressive array of gear you've got behind you there. I'm quite jealous of all those machines.
A couple synthesizers. Those are a lot of fun. Though I'm finding more and more less gear. Fewer pieces of gear.
Yeah.
I get more done in limitations. So I try to decide to use things and then kind of forget that there are other things around.
Yeah, sometimes that's a really good good way of forcing in some inspiration, is setting those limitations and saying, right, I'm just going to make a piece of music only using this bit of gear or this plugin. It would definitely be plugins in my case, because I have almost no hardware gear. But yeah, I quite like to do that sometimes, is just select a particular plugin or a virtual instrument and say, right, that's what I'm going to use for creating this. And only when I completely exhaust what I feel are my possibilities using that will I then come back to it later and start to use other things to finish it off. But it can be a good way of kind of avoiding that. I think they call it the Netflix effect, don't they? When you just you open your software and you've got thousands of different options to choose from. And it can be overwhelming and just put you off doing anything. It's kind of crippling. So something nice about just sitting down at one instrument and saying, I'm going to just do it with this and I'll come back later.
Right. That's a funny way to put it, the Netflix effect. Because I can remember being a kid, and we probably had 30 channels back in those days. And you'd flip through them and, you'd settle on something. A lot of times you just start watching something. But now we have Netflix and other streaming services along with that. And it's I don't know what to watch.
Yeah.
Almost everything
I do that
ever.
so often.
Yeah.
Yeah. sit down on a Friday night with my wife to watch a film, and we put it on and we just like a rabbit in headlights going, I don't know, what do you want to watch? I don't know. What about this? No, that looks cool. And it can go on for hours.
I'm not in the mood for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very true about all the choices we have today making music. With you don't need to have pieces of hardware gear next to you to be overwhelmed with options of samples, of plugins and presets, and you name it.
Yeah, it's a different landscape now to what it was. Yeah, even 10 years ago, I think there's so much more to choose from now. I remember just when I first started dabbling in using orchestral instruments, there was barely anything to choose from. I remember getting this thing called East West Symphonic Orchestra. I think that was for my 18th birthday or something. So that was more like 15 years ago now. And my girlfriend at the time was a violin player, and she instantly told me how terrible the violin sounded on it, which I wasn't too pleased about. But that was that's the only thing I had available to make orchestral music with. So if I wanted a cello, I had one sound to choose from. Whereas now we've got so many different sound libraries, and we're blending them all together, and it is great because it enables us to make music to a much higher standard than we were able to do back then. But at the same time, it can be intimidating jumping in sometimes.
Yeah, I get that a lot. I'm sure you probably spend certain days just trying to decide which cello from which collection to use instead of
which compressor to use on it.
Yeah, the old days, I got my one cello, my one compressor. Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly that.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the work you're doing, through Alibi and just in general, like what your average day
sure.
is
So
like.
So Alibi is we're a production music library, and we produce music in every imaginable genre, or at least we aim to, geared towards usage in all kinds of media. So that can be game trailers, movie trailers, TV promos, commercials, like online ads, anything that you can put music to. So yeah, our albums, I think we're about to release our album 1200. So I think when I joined, I was composing for Alibi before the official launch, which was I don't even know, was that 20 Christian one now? Maybe 2011, I think, and then it was 2014 that I joined full time. And we had about 200 or 300 albums at that point. So we're now like another 1,000 on, and we cover everything from like jazz to metal to orchestral, fantasy, horror, 1950s background TV music, literally like everything. So we're constantly working with a large team of amazing composers in all different genres. We've always got about between 20 and 30 albums being composed at any time. They're usually based on the requests that we're getting from our clients. So we've got a team of awesome music supervisors whose job it is to perform music searches for our clients. So people will contact us and say, I'm working on a Netflix trailer for a horror thing. What have you got that sounds kind of like this? And their job will be to assemble a playlist from our catalog, pitch that playlist to them. And sometimes we don't have the kind of thing that they're asking for, and that's where our album briefs generally come from. So a big part of the main part of my job, I would say, is getting those albums made. So the music supervisor team will feed back to me what we're most in need of, or they'll say to me, like, this album's been getting used a lot. We need a follow up because it's been rinsed, as we often say. So like, let's get some more of that in the works. So my job will be to work with the composers to deliver that and get the album made.
I'm actually surprised to hear you use the term album for this kind of work.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So,
why is that?
Well, I guess in like that kind of work, I think of it more as like one-off projects where like we need this kind of song. But I'm imagining then that when you speak like of an album, it's like in a specific genre for a certain purpose, certain type of.
Yeah, so for every project we do, we generally make music in albums rather than individual tracks, and we tend to aim for like between 10 and 15 tracks on an album. So I'm just pulling up our website to see what the latest ones are. So we've got high energy EDM, that's 10 tracks. We've got aspirational beats, that's 14 tracks. Garage rock, 15 tracks. So yeah, we tend to do them in batches like that, so that if somebody says like, right, we're looking for a new, we're working on a commercial, we want a punk track with edgy female vocals on it. What have you got? We don't want to just have one track to send them. We want to be able to say, well, here's 15 of them. Take your pick, and we can we'll cover a few different bases with that. So what the music supervisor team tend to do is collect references, like tracks that people have sent us, or tracks that they might have heard that they enjoy, or just finding other good examples, and we'll get a set of references, like maybe 5 to 10 tracks, and say, this is the kind of sound we're going for. We want an album of stuff in this world, and then we'll send that out to specific composers. We tend to choose composers based on who we think will be best suited to it. So, some of that, we've got composers that just do hip hop and they're amazing at it. We've got people who just do orchestral, epic, trailer music. We've got a few people who do a bit of all sorts, but everyone tends to have their kind of strong point areas, so we kind of like to keep people busy doing the kind of music they like working on. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it. We would just send out, normally have between 1 and sometimes 4 or 5 different composers working on an album, and I'll send out a bunch of references, and then they'll start sending tracks into me, and then my job's to listen through and give them feedback and help them steer the music either closer towards the brief, or to help them improve on the production, or help them make, just generally to make the music more licensable. I guess I'm the gatekeeper between the composers and the catalog that we have. So it's my job to make sure that stuff's up to scratch.
So there's a variety of people working on, say, that punk rock with the edgy female vocal track going.
Yeah. Yeah, so for example, that's an album that we've got in the works right now, and I think we have five different composers working on it, and maybe 5 different singers as well. So some of them are sort of crossing over between projects, but we chose like 5 of our composers who they love working with rock stuff. That's their thing. And then between them, they found some vocalists, and we found some as well, and teamed them up, and everyone's able to work remotely now, so it's pretty amazing that we can pull together an awesome sounding punk rock album with edgy female vocals that sounds current to like today's trends, and we can kind of pull that together in a couple of months if we have the right amount of people working on it, and get it out there to our clients. So yeah, I guess that's an example of how we put together the average album.
Right. Is there concern for the album itself to sound cohesive? Like, for instance, if I was making my album of edgy punk rock, like we described here, there'd be like some sort of effort to make the songs sound together, as like part of this one collection.
Definitely, yeah.
Is that concern as important for this type of work, considering that probably a lot of these tracks will just be heard in isolation? I'm assuming anyway that it's not really like people are consuming the album as a whole, which is like kind of true of the whole music
that's
industry
true.
these days.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true of the whole music industry. That's a whole.
So I'm saying that, I'm like, well, that's
but
how it is, I guess. Now it's the
yeah, like we remember in the days where you used to put a CD on in the car and drive for an hour and listen from start to finish, and actually knew the names of all the songs on it. That's something I really miss for sure. But yeah, there's a kind of balance to be struck, because we don't need them all to flow beautifully like a traditional album. It's not like the Beatles where we want it to like all sound completely cohesive, but at the same time we want them to sound like potentially they were made by the same artist or the same bunch of artists, so they need to be up to the same kind of standard. So partly our mix feedback helps with that, and production feedback, so we're guiding them. And sometimes I'll get a track from one of the composers and say to another one, like someone will send over a track and the drums will sound weak, so I'll pick one of the tracks from the other composer and say, check out this one, can we get the drums sounding a bit more like this, like notice how the snare just kind of punches through the track, notice how the kick thumps really hard, can we try and bring out some more of that, or can we try and get this sort of guitar tone or this sort of balance with the vocals. And that often helps, is to sometimes just send the composer one of the other tracks. It gives them a bit of a kick as well, because it's like the competitive nature can kick in then.
Yeah.
But that does help. And another part of it is mastering, which is a really important part. We expect the composers to mix their tracks. That's kind of part of the composition process. But we master all of our tracks in-house, so we have that final level of quality control. So once all the tracks are in, we check them all. We have various different mix versions and stems for each track. We'll get them, check them over really thoroughly, and then we get them over to our mastering guys, one of which is me, and then we have another guy called Scott, who's amazing. And we master them so that they're all kind of consistent, and often that really is the gel that makes what sounded like a bunch of random tracks in a style actually sound like a solid album. And sometimes, I actually with this stuff, we do aim for some of the albums, not all of them. Some of them are supposed to be more functional music, but some of them we want people to be able to just enjoy and listen to, because that's the quality we're competing with. We're not just trying to be background music. We're creating music at the same level in many cases, and with the same equipment as the artists that we're referencing. We're using the same gear. That's the kind of strange thing about the way it works now. Like when you're working on a hip hop track, those guys in the charts, they're using Ableton, they're using the same packs from Splice, they're using the same microphones, and they're using the same audio interfaces and monitoring setups. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to achieve that same level of quality. So that's a big part of what I do, is making sure that we don't have like cheap knockoff copies of tracks. We want unique, high quality music that is in the same world as the artist that we're referencing, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it is interesting, right, how the playing field has been leveled so much, where we all kind of have access to a lot of the same stuff. There's obviously like fancy studios with the crazy boards and compressors and outboard gear or whatever, but on the whole, I mean, we're pretty much right there. And of course, there's always artists that kind of pop out and they're like, I made this in my bedroom on my phone, and they have like the number one song.
Scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy how different it is. But even speaking of those big studios, about 10 years ago, I moved to a city called Birmingham in the UK for a couple of years, and I needed some work while I was there. So I found there was a recording studio nearby, and I knocked on the door and just waited in the waiting room for about an hour and a half until the owner came in, and he eventually came and said, "Who are you and why are you sitting here?" And I just said, "I'm looking for work, and I've studied music production. I've got a degree in music technology, and I'm looking for studio work." And he said, "Well, so you've been to college and university, but what have you actually done?" And I said, "Well, here's a list of some bands that I've recorded and mixed and mastered, and here's some of my work." And he suddenly was interested, and they got me working in the studio with some of the artists, which was really fun. They were only kind of small demo projects, but it was an amazing studio that had been there since the 80s, and apparently Black Sabbath had used to record early demos there and stuff like that. That was one of their claims to fame, I think. But it was a really cool place with loads of outboard gear, and I remember in my first session with the main engineer there. I said, right, so how do we use all this? And he's like, we don't. We just use Logic. It's on the computer. I was kind of amazed and relieved, because I thought, well, at least I know how to use that. But slightly disappointed that there were these huge racks of like amazing compressors and stuff that just no one was using. Just didn't need it.
Yeah, it just looks nice.
Looks cool. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it does kind of speak to how important it is to just get things done too. Sometimes fooling around, patching things in, that all takes time and effort. And when you can just grab this preset even that you've been using over and over again, sometimes it just makes sense, especially when you're paying for studio time.
And I guess like maybe 20, 30 years ago, artists had the luxury of like a label would pay for them to go into a studio, and their job would be to write music and play the music properly, and they would pay for a studio engineer to record and produce all their stuff, and they'd have weeks, sometimes months in the studio experimenting and trying out all these things and using all that awesome gear. But nowadays those roles are separated. I was also noticed from your episode with the sound designer a couple of weeks ago. He was talking about the different roles of sound recordists and mixers and things in the film world, and it's the same here. It used to be that you'd have, like in the classical world, you'd have composers and then arrangers and then recording engineers and all that stuff. And while that does still exist, the average artist now has to be able to do all of it. It's not much use being a singer if you don't have a microphone, at least, and a way of recording a demo. And most guitarists have access to ways of recording decent quality stuff that they could pretty much release. Most of us are having to program drums, and it's now normal to be able to create an entire piece of music and be a one-man or one-woman band, where we used to have maybe 10 people create that piece of music, and it's now like, why do you need all those people? You should be able to do that on your own. The expectation has changed now that technology has opened that up for us, I think.
Yeah, it certainly has. And I think sometimes that gets us into a little bit of trouble too, because we have to switch between these mindsets constantly. As I feel it, especially when I record vocals, because that's the thing I'm least comfortable with, and it's also the most forefronty kind of thing. And you have to have the emotion, you have to have the expression, but it also has to be listenable and in tune and in time. So you're trying to be technical, you're trying to be emotional, which sometimes are at odds. Sometimes the emotion happens when you slip a little off the note, or when you reach for it, or you kind of have that break in your voice. And having somebody there with you to just say like, no, that was good, keep that. Where you might be saying like, I want to kind of lost the note there at the end, and you're thinking about redoing it. I think that's a tricky thing. And now, of course, we can fix everything. We can correct things, and we can punch in so easy that it can be tough to know when to do that and when not to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a huge advantage to working with a producer when you're in a studio environment, because you've got someone, if you record a vocal badly, you can easily think, I'll just tidy that up, and I can play a guitar part in badly and think, I'll just fix that myself. But a recording engineer is just going to say, just do another take, and they'll push you to get it better. And but at the same time, you're able to stay in that sort of creative zone as well when you're trying to perform your best vocals. You don't want to also be mucking around with a keyboard and mouse, like going back and forth and changing these things. You want to be able to go straight into your singing zone, hyper focused, and let someone else handle the technical stuff while you're in that creative mode. Mm-hmm. Which is, I guess, something that we don't have the luxury of so much when we're working from home, because we're having to constantly change hats and like do a bit of this and a bit of that. And something I found useful for that is like going back to the whole Netflix effect thing, I used to start a track and then think immediately I need to be getting sounds down straight away, like, because otherwise I'm not feeling like I'm making any progress. And I did a little online course recently with a well-known producer called Kygo, who does like tropical house, EDM stuff. And I got into his stuff a few years ago and saw that he had an online course available to learn his way of producing. And I thought there must be something cool stuff I can learn from this. And I learned far more than I expected to. One of the things that I liked that he did was like, have a separate prep session to your writing session. Don't just jump in and try and write. Take an hour to scroll through your synths, go through your presets, and then save to your DAW's library, whether in Ableton or Logic. Create a little folder and just create a sound palette. So just like find a few bass sounds, find a few lead sounds, some plucks or some strings or brass and some drums and stuff like that. Make a little palette and load them into a session, and then leave it for a bit and then come back. And then when you start your writing session, you're not getting bogged down with sound selection. You're able to actually just compose. And even if you have to go back and replace a bunch of those sounds later, you've at least got that kind of separation. You're not trying to problem solve or select things. It's a different part of the brain, I think, that we use when we're in that flow state of composing and exploring ideas and creating good music. And I don't think flicking through sound libraries is very conducive to that feeling of inspiration sometimes.
No, that's great advice. If you think about like when you play in a band, I play in a 3-piece rock band, we don't go through that. It's not like, let me figure out like what instrument to play. Or all right, you're on the drums. You have 9,000 snare drums to choose from. Go ahead, pick one. Yeah. And you could have a different one for the verse and a different one for the chorus, and you could layer them, and there's all that's out the window. So that's really good advice. And I'm one of the things I do a lot of is make my own sounds and sample things and create instruments and things. I do them for free for Ableton Live users, and I sell some of them. I've done over 200 free ones and tons of stuff in my user library to choose from, where it's actually, I've created the same problem for myself that I had originally when I started making sounds. So now I have too many. But what I like to do a lot of times is when I am working on like a project, there's like a kind of like a collections area inside your library in Live where you can sort of favorite things. So I'll do exactly that. I'll kind of set myself up with like a palette, my colors that I'm going to use. And like you said, you can always, break the rules and go find something when you know you need it. But it is really nice to just have like a few things to work with and solve the puzzle. Like, how am I going to make these sounds work in what I'm trying to do?
Yeah, definitely. It really helps you keep moving as well, because if you've got like 15 or 20 or 30 sounds to choose from, that's enough that you don't have to just keep stopping and looking around. Like you've got the bare basics there, so you can focus on music, and as long as they're decent enough sounds that they inspire you, that they do sound good on their own, you can then separate that process of like, right, now's the bit where I just get ideas down. I'm not touching compressors. I'm not touching EQs. If I have to EQ it, it's probably not the right sound yet, unless I'm just filtering some low end off it to clean it up. I don't want to be messing around with all these different mix plugins. I just want to have a couple of hours of getting ideas down, and then the next session can be going in and doing that. So I tend to try and create a piece of music over. Well, I mean, I'm not quick enough at composing to be able to produce a whole track in one sitting anyway. But I think dividing it up, if you're going to have 3 different sessions or 4 sessions working on a track, then make the first one a little prep session where you get a sound palette together, and then the second one, get the ideas down. Third one, maybe flesh out the track, and then for the fourth one, final mixes and tweaks and that kind of thing. And having those breaks, I think, between help us take that hat off and put the new one back on, because they are just such vastly different mindsets things like mixing to composing, but they do all roll into the same thing. Like we have to be able to do all of those things now as composers and producers. I think like the days of being able to say I'm a composer, I don't mix, are behind us. Like you have to be able to do it at least to a half decent level.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty smart to do that in sessions like that. Would it be then like a 4-session process? Are you strict like that? Where you?
No, I'm not at all strict. No, that's not like how I would do every track. But like in an ideal world, if I that might be like if I'm working on a track and I've got 2 days to do it, I'll probably break it into like 4 chunks and say, right, for the first couple hours, I'm going to just do this, and then for the afternoon, I'll do that. But just having those stages, I think, though, where you're not trying to do them all at once. Obviously, it does help to kind of mix as you go along, though, and I find that most of the time, by the time I come to mix a track, it's almost already mixed. But there is a little bit of a risk to that because, like we're saying about when you've got a separate person whose job it is to mix a track, they take the whole thing with like on fresh ears and start from scratch. Whereas if you've already got it to 80% of the way of the level it can be quite tempting to just think that sounds good enough. I'll send that to the label or I'll send that to the library. And often that happens with the composers that I'm working with. Like what I'm basically hearing is like a high quality demo. And then I'll say, it's good, but can we focus on getting now the quality? Can we try and get this sounding a bit bigger and bolder and more gelled together? And then they'll send me a new mix and it sounds amazing. So I think sometimes people need a bit of a nudge because they will happily like if a label or a library says to you, yeah, this sounds great, send me the stems, most composers aren't going to go, oh, hang on, I want to mix it first. They'll just go, oh, if you like it, then it's good to go. But I think it's good to put that extra time in and get the standard up as high as you can.
Yeah, I've ran through that in the last project I worked on, recording songs with my band, where I was mixing as I'm going. And what I started to realize I was doing, I was at every stage, we record the drums, and I was like mixing the drums so they sound good, then record the bass. Now I'm mixing it with the bass, and then I record the guitars. And so I'm trying to make it sound almost finished at every single stage that we went through.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to like doing the vocals and then some overdubs, I almost had like no space for anything. I was out of room, and I think that process works sometimes when I'm just focusing on one song, because you can kind of develop things out, and because it's all more connected in a session, and you know that like you're going to keep going. But when you're doing like this whole set, it can be easy to sort of like get ahead of where you really are in the process.
Yeah. And it's kind of risky because you can go down a rabbit hole obsessing about kick drum compression settings when you've not even got the bass in yet and you're already trying to mix the drums. But it does help. It does help. And in a way, I think it's nice I think there's a good balance to get where you sort of mix as you go, so that you're hearing the best version that you can, but without going too final with it and being, without trying to make it sound totally finished, because quite often you'll otherwise just need to strip all those plugins away and start again anyway, because it can end up sounding over-processed if you do that. And I'm always wary when I look at the signal chain and it's got loads of different things on it. I think, do I need all that? Is that all helping? Could I get a more natural result if I just strip this back to a few different layers?
Yeah, do more with less usually is the best way to go.
Definitely. Yeah. But I do think, like I've always said, that for me, mixing and production is part of the composition in a way. So while I'm on one hand I'm trying to separate it, I've always liked the fact that I'm mixing and producing my own stuff, because you could mix a track in two different, different people mix the same track, and you end up with a completely different result. There's no right way of doing it. There's no wrong way of doing it. It's just some things sound better to some people, and I think having that creative control for an artist over how your music sounds is really important. So it's definitely one of the upsides to doing everything yourself like we do.
Yeah. Well, if you're putting together, these collections of albums in certain styles, which by the way, I was thinking as you were saying it, it's something that I kind of almost do myself, because I like to do so many different styles of music, where I'll be like, all right, this is the more acoustic one, this is the ambient one, this is the like punk rock unleashed crazy thing, It's kind of like a nice way to scratch different itches. I know it's probably not the smartest thing as an artist to be all over the place, but whatever. It makes a lot more sense, in this world, I think. But what I wanted to ask you is, there kind of like a certain level, well, mixing, as you said, is sort of an interpretation, right? Like each person does it differently. How much do you guys explore going into like kind of like experimental areas, or like, like I might record a song and purposely make it sound more lo-fi and run it through a tape machine and kind of do things to it to make it sound like an older recording to degrade it a little bit?
Yeah.
Or is it more like we really need to have a kind of polished thing here for the
that is something
the
that
of releasing?
Yeah, I remember one of my colleagues saying on one of our production calls a while ago that like some of the clients are asking for music that doesn't sound so polished, and so we try not. It depends on the genre that we're going for, but in, like you said, in many genres, that kind of lo-fi, gritty, sort of underproduced sound, and especially in the case of like punky stuff, is part of it. So we try and make a conscious effort not to like overproduce those things. But I do try and we try and give composers quite a bit of creative license, really, when we're working on these things. We'll give them a brief, but I'm not coming back to them saying, no, the bass line doesn't sound enough like the bass line in this track. The references there are there to give them some guidance and inspiration, and an example of the kind of sound that we are looking for and that our clients are looking for. But I think I like to give composers, especially if they're good composers, and they know what they're doing, it's nice to give them a lot of creative control over what they're doing, because then you'll get the best results out of them, and you don't end up with a catalogue of music that sounds like it's all created by one person. And I've worked for libraries in the past where they're really, really particular about the feedback, and they're saying, I want this arpeggiator to sound more like that, and can you make this lead sound more like that? And a lot of that just comes down to personal taste. So when I'm giving feedback, I'm trying to separate my own taste from and my own ways of doing things from what's actually useful feedback. Am I helping by giving them this feedback? Am I helping them make the track more licensable and more sellable, or am I just making it more like how I would do it, which is never my goal. Because I'd just do it myself if I wanted that. And that's something I really love about working with so many different composers, is you can send the same bunch of references to 3 or 4 different people, and they'll all send you stuff that sounds quite different, because they'll all have their own take on it, and they'll all use their own gear and their own experience. And that's part of the fun of it, really, is letting people explore and get inspired. I don't know if I answered the question there. I think I went off on a tangent.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it reminds me of my work teaching a Berkeley online class. It's an Ableton Live sampling class. And every week there's an assignment. And I've been doing this class a couple years now. And it's almost like a prompt, like the studio needs this kind of song with the punk rock edgy vocals, but it'll just be, something else we'll have. And you'd think you'd start to hear the same thing over and over again, but every semester 15 or so different people turn in that same assignment, and it's always a surprise. It's always like, wow, like,
Yeah.
isn't that cool that you can have this one of the assignments is actually to create like a creepy horror show intro. So it's kind of like work you would do, I assume. And the reference is the American Horror Story opening. American Horror Story.
We've literally just released an album called Spooky Retro Horror, which is probably not far off the kind of thing you're describing. Yeah.
I've probably heard 300 examples of that, so and they're all so different. It's a very specific thing because it's one song that they're given, but we talk about like the techniques and sampling that were used to create it. And it's amazing that even with that one song, those certain set of techniques that we're offering for the week, so much variety, so much difference.
That's incredible that like inspiration and creativity work that way. Like you can give one reference track to a bunch of different people and end up with a load of completely different results. And I think that's a really awesome thing. And a nice thing about working in different styles, like you mentioned, like you like to work in quite a few different genres, and that's always been a really cool thing for me about the kind of work that we do, because while I have genres that I prefer to listen to, I quite enjoy making music in various different genres. And as an artist, you're a bit limited to generally, unless you separate your work into different projects and go onto different A-lists. But if you're an artist that's kind of releasing music publicly, you build a following of people that will expect a certain kind of music from you. So, if you're making kind of lo-fi electronic music and then suddenly you drop a techno track, the audience isn't going to be too pleased. You'd have to do that under a different name, probably. But in the world of what we do, we can be working on multiple things at the same time, and the same composers can be doing a hip hop album and also an EDM album. Because they enjoy both and they're equally skilled at both. But they would never release those two things as an artist. So in a way, it gives people who they may be artists outside of the library music work that they do. It gives them a way of exploring genres that they might not otherwise put the time into working with.
Yeah.
So that's definitely been a fun part of it for me, being able to just work on so many different styles and not have to actually say, I'm not a hip hop producer, I'm not an orchestral composer, I'm not a dance producer, I just do a bit of everything or a bit of whatever I fancy, or whatever project I'm working on at the time, I am wearing that hat for that period of time.
What kind of producer are you, Sam? Well, today I'm doing this. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's how I like to work too. And I just had a podcast with Mr. Ed Rollo, and he was speaking about the importance of narrowing it down. And I totally get that too. Where, and I mean, literally last night, actually, a song came on. It's like a new release from a band. And the rest of the album wasn't ready yet. It's coming out in October, I think. So I went back to the old stuff. And I was like, well, let me see, something like it. And it wasn't the same, and I turned it off. Because
oh no.
And I will listen to it, but it wasn't what I wanted in the moment, I wanted that same thing going, that same vibe, the same feel. And it wasn't that. And I changed it. And I thought about Ed and what he said. And I'm like, he's got a point. Because, as the listener, like you said, I was expecting like EDM techno. And now all of a sudden you're putting out, hip hop. And it's like, that's not what I listened to you for. So it's...
Yeah. I mean, an artist is creating like a brand when they put themselves out there and do an album in a certain way. And it takes a lot. I mean, there's some artists like people like Ed Sheeran, for example, who can be super diverse, and he'll do a trap track one day and then like a acoustic track the next. But he's sort of opened his audience up to that and done it in a way that still sounds coherent in a way. But for the most part, I'm the same. If I'm listening to an album by an artist or a band and I think this is awesome, I want to hear some more, you kind of expect to hear something similar when you hear the next album. It's got to sort of follow a natural progression from it. It's a bit weird if you find out that metal band that you were listening to suddenly just got into dubstep and they've just dropped their guitars and now they're exclusively working on laptops. It kind of kills it a little bit.
Yeah. Head banging behind a laptop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I have that as the artist where I want to do all kinds of stuff, and then have the opposite as the listener where I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Changing what you're doing. It's definitely some kind of weird contradiction within myself.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree though about narrowing it down as well. I think I try to avoid just hopping from one genre to the next as much as I can. The genres that I have worked in, I tend to fully immerse myself in it while I'm doing it, because when you're creating a style of music that you're genuinely into, you kind of pick up on certain subtleties and nuances that that people who have only just heard it for the first time wouldn't do. Hip hop is not a genre that I'm particularly, and I have worked on some, but it's a huge collection of genres. But on the whole, hip hop is one of my least favorite styles. And sometimes we'll have submissions through Alibi where a hip hop producer will send us some music and say, here's some examples of my work, what do you think? And I listen to it and I think, to me, that sounds like pretty good quality hip hop. Send it to my colleague Paul and he comes back and rips it to shreds and it's like, no, it's terrible, it sounds really fake, it sounds really inauthentic. And I'm thinking, right, so you're hearing all these different subtleties that I'm not hearing, and I think that's really important. And it's the same, like I come from traditionally a metal band background, and for someone who doesn't like metal to have a go at making some, it's going to sound horrendous. So it's the sort of thing that, like, yeah, if you can really appreciate a style of music before you start working in it, you're far more likely to get good results. So, and they could be diverse. It could be that you're doing techno one day and jazz the next, but it helps if you really have an appreciation for techno and an appreciation for jazz, because you can love loads of different styles of music. Like a lot of the time I listen to dance music, like house, EDM stuff. That's what I tend to listen to in the gym when I'm cooking. It makes me feel good. But then sometimes I'll be driving and I'll listen to metal, and I also love movie trailer music. I love big orchestral stuff. So they're just different hats that I put on, but they're all things that I've invested time in getting to know what's good and what works well in those genres and how to produce that to a high standard. So yeah, I do agree that it does definitely help to focus in, and that is something that I tend to recommend to composers. Is when people contact me and I say, can you give me? That's my first question generally. Is when someone's like when I'm working with a new composer, they might have done one project for us, and I'll say, can you give me a list of the kind of genres? Give me an idea of the genres you're interested in working with or most enjoy working with. And if they come back and say anything, I don't tend to believe them because it's just too broad. Mm-hmm. There's just too much music out there. You can't honestly say you can make any kind of music to an exceptional standard. I certainly can't. But when people come back and say, well, I'm pretty good with electronic and also love orchestral and I can do a bit of hip hop, then I think, cool, okay, I've got those areas that I can rely on you for, and I'll send you projects in those, like within those sort of boundaries.
I would imagine
boundaries is not the word.
Well, they kind of are boundaries, you know. I mean, there's things you can't do in hip hop that you can do in other genres, and vice versa. When you pick something, you definitely have eliminated a lot of other options immediately.
Yes.
So
it's like that saying of saying yes to something is saying no to a lot of other things potentially.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that is used in a way of if you say yes to something, you've now committed and now you've lost all these other opportunities. In music making, it's almost like the opposite. Like, say yes because you need to get rid of all this other stuff, all these other choices.
Yeah.
If I'm making jazz, I know I'm not going to use an 808 drum machine. Like, I don't even have to think about that. It's not even on the table. And
You
that's
can
a
put
good
that in a
thing
completely
this.
separate folder in Live.
Yeah. Whereas I think when we say that in life, it's kind of like a bad thing. Like, you're going to miss all these other opportunities because you're on this commitment that you don't really care about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's true. Actually, there's the different ways of interpreting that saying, but yeah, I think that's a good point.
so it is kind of funny that you would probably think, if I was pitching myself to you to say I want to start making music for Alibi, I would kind of think like probably the best thing to say, I can make anything you need, man. What do you need? I can do it all. And actually narrowing yourself down and saying, no, I'm this kind of guy. I'm the guy for this thing, is really a much better thing to do. Puts you in a,
It does
gives
help.
you a job.
Versatile is definitely good. I mean, there's some people that there's some people that will because generally if someone does orchestral music, I will assume that they can do quite a few different things. And one of the guys that I worked with recently does kind of like fantasy adventure sort of orchestral stuff, and I said, are you interested in doing some kind of dark heroic orchestral? And he was like, no, I just do fantasy. And I thought, well, that's cool. Your area, that's good. But it does help if you can rely on people to do, like, okay, so you like orchestral, you can cover that kind of exciting, uplifting, positive, celebratory orchestral music, but you could also maybe do some kind of dark and ominous stuff. Some people would say to me, they're like, I love doing underscores. I'm great at like crime music, but that's quite a wide range of music, actually, like the sort of stuff that you'd hear on crime underscores. So if someone says I'm up for any of that kind of like TV underscore style stuff, that's kind of helpful to know that that's where they feel most comfortable. But because we work on so many different projects, I kind of look for two things. I want people to be versatile enough to be able to use them on more than one album, because we like to work with people regularly, really, and the more work a composer does with us, we build up a sort of rapport with them. We know what we're going to get when we ask them for some new music. But also, I like to see these people that I work with becoming successful, and there's so many composers that I've worked with who have, like, they've started composing for us, and we are the first library they've ever worked for. And then after a few years, they're making a good living. They're landing tracks in awesome trailers and commercials. They're posting about it on social media. I like to see people becoming successful off the back of the work that they do for us, and the best way to get that is to consistently keep making music for the catalogue. And obviously, if you can only do one thing, we don't always need more and more of that. We don't need a constant stream of fantasy music or a constant stream of like lo-fi hip hop stuff. But if that person can lend themselves to a small, like a little group of genres, then we can generally keep them busy and say, right, they finish their project, they deliver the stems and stuff, and they say, what can I do next? And I say, here's another one. Do you fancy having a go at this? And they'll go, nah, not. What else have you got? And then I send them another one. They go, yeah, I'll have that. So I like to kind of offer projects and let people take the ones that they feel inspired by, and prefer people not to take on projects that they feel a bit reluctant about, because you generally get the best results from people who enjoy what they're doing. And sometimes I'll send a brief to a composer, not quite sure if it's their cup of tea or not, and they'll come back and say, oh God, I love this style of music, I've just been watching this show, I'm obsessed with it, and this is perfect, I'm all over this brief right now. So that's great when they're genuinely excited for it.
So do you mind talking a little bit about how you start finding other artists to work with? How you start building these relationships? Like, suppose somebody listening to this podcast is like, yeah, I want to get into this. Do you guys, are your doors open? Or do you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. We generally don't go out looking for new music or new writers because there's so many approaching us every day. We get emails every day from people asking, if they can work for us and pitching stuff to us. And unfortunately, because we're quite a small team of people monitoring that, we don't get to listen to everything that comes through. But now and again, we will just dip in and to those emails and search through and send. If one of us hears something we like, we'll send it to the rest of the production team and start sending it around, going, "Yeah, this sounds cool. What do you think?" And everyone will go, "Yeah, I like the sound of that. We should see if they're up for working on this album." Or sometimes people will pitch us a whole album, which is becoming increasingly common, actually. And I think for more experienced composers, that is quite a good move. If you've already worked on a bunch of albums for other libraries and there's a style that works well for you, that you've had success from in the past, just make an album of that and then send it to a library and give it a couple of weeks and say, like, just offer them the album and give it a couple of weeks. Follow up if you haven't heard back. And then if you never hear back, then send it to another library. And quite often we've had some really cool releases that have come from that. Someone will just send us an album that we didn't know we needed, and it's awesome. But then the majority of our albums are ones that we've sort of curated a list of references. So I'd say the best thing is to send a short introduction, email us with a short introduction and a SoundCloud playlist, ideally, showcasing like a range of references, and say, like, it doesn't have to be like 50 tracks or something. It could be 3. It could be like, here's 3 tracks in a certain style. Would you be interested in some of this? Or here's 10 tracks, like 2 tracks in 5 different genres, to give you an idea of what I can do. And that's what worked for me as a composer when I was getting into the industry. It was about 12 years ago I started composing for libraries. And at the time, my only experience had been playing in bands. That's where I started. And then I went to college and university, and I started recording bands and mixing bands. And in my own band, the other two meant that I was in a 3-piece metal band with a drummer and a bass player. And the other 2 guys suddenly left to join another band. And we were just about to record an album. So I didn't want to cancel it. I just learned how to program drums and play bass and then do all the keyboard stuff. So I ended up producing this whole album myself and having to learn all of those skills. And that's kind of how I got into doing that. But so alongside working with other artists, I was thinking, I wonder what other styles I can make. If I can do my band, I wonder if I could just do like an indie rock track, and started listening to other styles of music, and then assembling a little playlist now. And I sent them out to a few libraries, and they started getting back to me, and that's how I got into it. And once you've landed a few placements with a library as well, it helps, because you can use that as a bit of an introductory credit, and you say, here's some examples of my music. I've also had music used in this and this and this show. That's quite a good way to catch somebody's attention at a library. If they can see that you've already had stuff used, then that's obviously a big selling point. But it's not a necessity for me. When I'm looking at a new submission, I don't really care where they've studied, how long they've been doing it, or what they've done before. I just want to hear it, and if it's good, and if it's something we need, I'll be interested. It doesn't matter how many placements they've had. If I have a listen and I think it sounds terrible, I won't be replying. So it's all about the music. Bottom line, it's all about the music.
Right.
Really long answer. Sorry about that.
No, I appreciate that. I like hearing the long answer instead of just send us something and we'll if we like it, we'll get back to you. It's nice to hear the detail, and also just how you got into it too. And it's funny how it's sort of a result of a problem you ran into, with the
Yeah.
other two guys leaving to join another band. Like, that's a problem, right? That's not what you wanted, but you were able to take that, and now who knows what would have happened if they didn't do that? You might not even be in this
Yeah,
way,
exactly. No, that's a really good point. Actually, I hadn't even considered that, but yeah, those guys leaving the band as we were about to record an album just forced me to jump in and learn. And I happened to know a guy who had just sent me one of his tracks, like a friend of mine who's sent me one of his demos, and I said, "Well, yeah, your drummer's incredible. Who's playing drums on your new demo?" And he said, "It's programmed." And I said, "What do you mean programmed?" I literally didn't know what he meant. MIDI drums. How does that work? And then I that's what opened me up into that whole world of using virtual instruments. And then it kind of opened the doors to me, because I thought all I could do if I wanted to make music was join a band. I didn't realize that I could literally produce a whole song on my own. And I'm not saying it sounded good, because I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was 17 years old and I was recording on a laptop. Very, very basic stuff. But yeah, that kind of opened the door to me to like, well, if I can do this, what will I be able to do in a few years if I keep working at it and expanding my kind of taste in music and my skill set, and where can it go? And yeah, library music and production music really helped me kind of expand into that, because it got me going, right, I can try this and I can try that. And actually, while I was studying at university, many of the projects we used to do were like create a piece of music using this piece of software, or based on this abstract idea. Like we would do a sampling project where you record a sound and make a whole track out of it, or do a whole track in Reason using so and so. But I kind of made a point of every time I did a project, I would then send that track to a library and get them accepted. So I think in my last few years of university, all of the music that I did ended up somehow getting into a library. So none of it was just wasted as coursework. And I think I've tried to do that ever since, really. I don't tend to just sit down and start a track and noodle around and see what happens. Everything I start tends to be for a purpose, and I start it, finish it, get rid of it, move on to the next project. Yeah, that's just, I think that's a slightly different mindset of working as a library composer rather than an artist, because I guess as an artist you're experimenting more, you're trying to find your direction, whereas we are sort of writing music to order, so you're getting that balance of putting your own style into it, but also being able to produce music to a brief is quite different. And it's something that puts off a lot of artists. Sometimes we'll get emails from artists saying, here's some of my music, would you be interested in releasing it? And we'll say, well, actually we're working on an album in this style, which is kind of similar. Would you be interested in pitching some tracks? And it doesn't fit with their artistic vision, so they won't do it. That's not a bad thing. It's just an observation that there's a difference in mindset of being a composer to being an artist. I think when you're an artist, it's about that sort of artistic identity and integrity, whereas in this world it's more about delivering a high quality product that you still enjoy. And that's something that is really essential to me, that whatever style of music I'm writing in, even if it's a style that I don't love, and I don't love hip hop, for example, but I recently worked on our new epic hip hop album, and I collaborated with one of our composers on 2 tracks for it. And by the time they're finished, I absolutely love those tracks. And I feel proud to release them. And that's not because I was thinking I'm doing a great job of this. It's because I spent ages on it to make it, to get it to the level that I thought it was good, if you know what I mean. Sometimes that takes longer than others, but I think it's really important that you like the music that you've created if you want other people to enjoy it too.
I think it's really smart that you made that point of always, every time you go to make something, it has sort of like a purpose, whether it's to learn, to grow, or to be something, like you said, to submit to the library music with your, they could have just been college projects that, you never did anything with. It's something I try to encourage with a lot of my students in Berkeley too, is to say, listen, we're going to do all these assignments, but if you're working on something and you can kind of make this fit something else you're doing, and maybe we have to bend a few of the requirements, like I'm okay with that. As as a teacher, I think it's really important that the assignments are real. They're not just like these
Yeah.
academic exercises that don't go anywhere. They should be actual real world things, that mean something to you. So it's cool that you do that. And as far as like writing from the brief type of thing, and being like the artist, I had this kind of epiphany myself when a buddy of mine and I started writing some songs specifically for kids with like in need of help of like social skills, like autistic.
Yeah.
And there's this concept of social stories where you tell them a story of like what it's like to be in a restaurant, and that teaches like the
Yeah.
proper socially acceptable behavior. So we made songs of that. And suddenly my artistic side was out the window. It was just like, I'm
Yeah.
not doing these songs to be some like deep artist. I'm writing these songs for a point. They have to get this thing across, and they need to be kind of catchy and fun, and they need these elements. What a relief, honestly, to go into that project and not have to worry about if I'm being intelligent enough with my chord changes and if the melody is doing something, fancy. That stuff was just all out the window. And as I've talked to more and more people, especially people that work in like this kind of world where they're writing for film or games or something, they speak of often of like, I don't know how people make music without that, like that brief is so
Yeah.
helpful. And I've been really trying to encourage that in a lot of my other teachings. When you are like making your song, like think about like, what's the point? What's it for? What's the listener going to do when they hear it? Because once you've defined that stuff, so much falls in line, and you say yes to that, and you can automatically say no to all those other million things that often get in the way when we're like searching in the fog for our artistic vision.
Yeah, definitely. For me, like I have to know what the goal is before I start. I can't just, and like you said about some people saying that they almost can't work without a brief. I can totally relate to that. And I was actually talking to my colleague Paul about that, I think a year or two ago, because I think it was in around 2020, where everything was kind of awful and we weren't really getting much life outside of work. Fortunately, we were all still working, and Alibi kept going, and so we were all able to continue working throughout that whole thing, which was amazing. But what was not so easy was getting inspiration, because we were just, every day was exactly the same, and it was just work, work, work. But I remember thinking, right, I'm not feeling enough passion for music. I could tell that my level of enthusiasm for the whole thing had dropped, and I knew that was a big problem, and I needed to do something about it. And I was talking to my colleague Paul, and he said, just sit down and write. Just like, if you were to just write a track now, if I would say write a track tonight, what style would it be? And I said, I've literally no idea, because I work with so many different styles as a composer and as a production director with Alibi. I'm constantly working, like hopping between so many different genres. People are sending me different styles every day, and I'm having to review and give my feedback, that I think I've actually just lost my taste in music. I just don't have one anymore. And he said, I think you got to get that back. And it was around that year I just suddenly discovered a bit of a love for, I've always liked electronic music and dance music. Deadmau5 has like been one of my favorite artists, just in the background for about 12 years or something. And then I think it was over 2020, I started listening to more dance music and suddenly realized I actually love some of this. I'm going to start making some, but for fun. And I started doing it and said, this is going to not be for Alibi. It's not going to be a library project. I'm actually going to set myself a goal here of just making some tracks for my own enjoyment. They don't have to be structured in the way that we structure our tracks for our clients. I don't have to do various mixed versions and supply the stems, and I don't have to make them all build to a huge climax so they can fit the end of a movie trailer. I'm just going to make stuff that I like, and that I discovered that some online courses that I jumped into, and I found that studying those things really fired up that passion again. I've discovered all these new workflow tips, and like after 10 years of doing things in a certain way, you can get a little bit stagnant, and learning from how other people do it and learning their process and developing those new skills just totally fired everything up. And it was awesome. And that then sort of transferred into all the other aspects of my work as well. So from doing a couple of online courses in how to make EDM, I was suddenly really excited about all the other areas of work, the trailer music, the kind of underscore stuff, the sound design, the whole lot, because they're all transferable skills. But I think that kind of key point of to keep learning and keep pushing yourself is where the inspiration comes from. As soon as you stop learning, it's all over.
I think that's probably where a lot of the artists, feel like this might not be the type of thing. I don't want to just make that one thing. I don't want to just do that. And a great antidote to that would be learning to discovering new things, adding to your workflow. Yeah, there are some great, amazing courses available. Deadmau5 has one, right? He's got the master class.
I did work through. I don't think I got to the end of it, but I did really enjoy listening to him chatting about the way he does things. And
sometimes
there's so many of those out there now.
Sometimes it's just the nuggets in between where they say like, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care about this part. And you're like, oh, I don't have to sweat that compressor on the kick drum for 7 hours anymore.
Just seeing other people's workflows as well. The way they start a track, the way they kind of approach it, the creative approach is different. I mean, for me, coming from the metal background of just sit down with a guitar and come up with the riffs and then string them together into a song, and the drummer produces a drum track to go along with it, and everyone else does their bit, and then you go and record it. That is a very different process to producing a house track. Like there's none of that. There's no, generally not, you're not sitting there riffing. You're starting with a beat, or you're starting with a chord progression or something like that, and then you've got all these different sounds that you want to layer up. So I think learning to produce different genres, even if you don't necessarily want to pursue them, it just really helps to kind of expand that capability, and it overflows into other styles. Something else I did was like I switched to Ableton to mix things up. I guess I was using it for sound design related projects, and I thought I'm going to try making a track in this thing, which felt like an impossible task at the time because I was used to Logic. But then I eventually found I absolutely loved it, and but there are a lot of things that you can do in Logic that you just can't do in Ableton. Those functions don't exist. It doesn't even have like a scissors tool, which is something I use a lot in Logic, and loads of things. But I found that it forced me to only do things that I actually needed to do, and focus on the things that mattered. And now when I go back into Logic, I use it completely differently because Ableton has taught me how to use Logic more efficiently. And that's just another thing coming from doing these little online courses where other people are showing you the way they do things, and suddenly all the lights go on in your mind and you're full of ideas. It's awesome. There's no end to the amount you can learn.
Right. That is the beauty, right? And like we said, I think right in the beginning, there's so many ways to do it. There's no wrong way. There's no right way.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you maybe just one more thing, kind of a little bit circling back, but you mentioned when you're doing feedback on tracks from people that have submitted tracks for like, your albums. You give advice on making it more licensable and sellable. And I
Yeah.
was kind of curious what those types of things are and how that might be different from maybe like the types of things you might do if you were more in the artistic frame of mind.
Yeah, I guess there's quite a few different things to consider, but one obvious difference when you listen to one of our tracks compared to an artist track is the way we structure our tracks. So in a sort of typical artist track, they tend to flow from start to finish without stopping, and they don't ramp up too much in intensity. Whereas our tracks, because we basically like to make each track like a toolkit for editors. So regardless of what the genre is, we'll introduce like little edit points throughout the track. So after a section, it might stop for like a 1 bar pause, and then it will come back in again. And that allows, when an editor's cutting, because clients don't tend to use like a whole track at a time when they're working on an advert, like commercial or a movie trailer. Sometimes we will license tracks and they'll only be using 10 seconds of it. That's happened so many times for me. Like I've got a 2 or 3 minute track and they will pay a license fee, and I'll get really excited thinking my track's in this trailer, and then I'll see it and they've only used like 10 seconds of it. Still got paid, so it's awesome, but they only used 10 seconds. But if your track just goes from start to finish 3 minutes long for full intensity, they can't cut that very smoothly. So what we tend to do is introduce these little edit point breaks throughout the track. So you can see from looking at the waveform, there's like chunks of audio. They don't just drop to silence, but they'll tail off and then come back in again. And we try and make it sound like a deliberate musical choice rather than like something we've just cut there on purpose. But that allows them to have those sort of little transition sections. We try to make them build more than an artist track typically would as well, because in commercials and movie trailers and game trailers and generally anything that's advertising related, we're trying to build excitement in the audience. We want them to be excited about the thing that they're looking at. So that kind of intensity building really helps with that. So we'll build them up with more layers than you might do in an artist track. And rather than say a track might sort of build up and then sort of simmer back down again, we like to have them finish more on a climax, because quite often at the end of a commercial or an end of a movie trailer, the music ramps up and then stops, and then it comes back in again for a few more hits and then it stops. So yeah, kind of having those ramps of intensity followed by short pauses is a part of it. We'll also add in like alternate ending options. So there'll be little stings. So there'll be like a sustained ending option, or it will build up and then stop, and then it will come back in again and then have a sustained ring out. So if the editor's thinking, I just want it to stop dead, then they can cut it there. Or if they want like a couple of stabs, they can grab those from just after the track. So if you're listening to one of our tracks from the first time, you might think, what are all these little extra bits in there? Like, why does it stop and then start again and then stop? That's why we do that. We also produce alternate mix versions for every track. So we'll do what we call a rhythm mix, where we take out in a track with vocals, we'll do an instrumental, because that's quite often needed. But we'll also produce like a rhythm mix where we take out the main melodic element in a track. So say there's like a lead guitar hook, and then there's a rhythm guitar underneath. We would take the guitar hook out. And in an orchestral track, it might be the big French horn line or something, and we've still got the strings like chugging away underneath. So they can be more useful for talking over, really. If there's dialogue in a scene, they might not want this huge soaring melody, but they might still want all the drums and the underscore stuff. So we do various different mix versions of each track, about 10, I think, to be precise, which can be quite tedious when you finish a track and you think, done, I'm going to send it off to the label or the library, and it's finished. And then I get back to you with a list of like 12 different mix versions and 15 stems. But the stems are also really important. We don't have like 150 stems, like from the whole session. We ask people to kind of group them down. So we'll say like, I want your drums, and then your percussion, and then any kind of bass elements, any kind of strings or guitars or whatever. So we separate them into the individual groups that the clients can mix from. And often the case is with trailers, they'll hear a track they like, but they want to mix it from stems because they can chop in and out things they want. They can use the percussion on their own, and quite often they'll just license a stem. Like we've had tracks where I think one of them was Pitch Perfect a few years ago, and my friend James, who was a composer on a track that got licensed for it, he phoned me up and said, I can't find it in the trailer. And then he said, it's just the kick drum. They just use 8 beats of the kick drum. But he still paid for it. So it's worth having those stems in. Sometimes they're just going to license that. They might just want the cymbal stem. So that's it. I've forgotten what your question was now. It was, how do we make them licensable?
Yeah. So what are those?
But yeah, I guess another part of it is making sure that they kind of, they're authentic to the genre that we're trying to produce. They kind of sound like they're part of that world. And a really key thing is having some kind of emotional impact, I think. I saw a quote a few weeks ago. I think I was just listening to music on TV, and it came up saying, music is what feelings sound like. And I thought that's like a really simple way of like effective way of saying that, but it resonates with me. And I think, that in most cases, the client is using music to try and add feeling to something, whether they're trying to add some drama or to add some kind of seriousness or some excitement or emotive quality to something. The music has to do something like that. So it has to have the capability of shifting your mood slightly from one place to another. If it doesn't do that, it's probably not serving its purpose. So not necessarily like huge emotional overwhelm, but you've got to, I think for me, when I'm starting a piece of music, or I'm listening to a new track from a composer, I'm thinking, what's this? What does this need to make me feel? What does it need to make the audience feel? Because that's really the purpose of it, is to stir up or alter, in a way, the emotion of the audience.
I like that. Music is what feelings sound like. And, it's funny because it is so simple and down to the point. And one of my first feelings of being kind of amazed by music was listening. I was a young kid, and I think I was like mad about something or upset about something. I put on some music. I don't really remember what it was. And it changed how I felt. I wasn't mad anymore. I wasn't upset. And I was like, how did that happen? That question of like, I was a different person 3 minutes ago. And that's one of the incredible
things about music. I totally agree, and that's what it's there for. And it's good music, whatever the genre is music that people can relate to. It can be as technical and complicated as you like, and really clever. But for me, generally, overcomplicated music with too many different layers and too like advanced chord progressions and stuff, they can be great, but more often simple, effective music is more relatable. And that's why so many pop songs have the same 4 chords. It's because those progressions are relatable to people, and why so many songs use strings to create emotion. We had a brief recently, just last week. Somebody sent over a reference, which is this like amazing strings piece, and said, we want something like this, but the client hates strings. And I was just laughed and said, well, that's not to them, but my colleagues, like, this strings are the perfect tool for creating that emotion. It's going to be really hard for us to find anything that does exactly that without strings in it. It will exist, but there's certain instruments and certain musical devices that are relatable to us and we connect to. And yeah, when it's punk rock and it's really hard, aggressive, noisy stuff, that is easy to relate to for people who are feeling a bit angsty. And but then there's the kind of emotive piano music that could bring you to tears. It's all doing the same thing. It's shifting us from one place to another, and I think that's an incredible thing about working with so many different styles of music, and a really awesome thing to be doing.
Yeah, it is. It's there's a magic to it, you know, as much as we learn and as much as we discover the techniques and the tricks, there's still something magical behind it, which is cool.
Yeah,
And I think that's what keeps me coming back all the time. You know, the more I learn, it doesn't,
yeah, me too.
I haven't, it's not like a magician that knows how all the tricks are done. It's still, wow, how did that happen?
Yeah, I remember on my first day of college, actually, the the tutor said, "You're going to hate us by the end of the course because all the things that you love about your favorite records that you think are magic, you're going to know how they're done. You're not going to be listening to the record as a whole. You're going to be listening to all the individual layers." And I'll always remember that. But it didn't make me hate them. It made me enjoy it more, because it made me able to separate things out. When I was listening to my favorite songs from when I was a teenager, then I'm not just hearing the whole thing. I'm hearing the whole thing too, but I'm hearing all the individual layers and appreciating tiny details that I might never have heard if I hadn't learned all those skills. So yeah, it's not taken away my love for it. It's increased it in a way. Like, just the more you discover about the things that you enjoy in music, the more magical it is in a way.
Yeah, similar for me. When I started playing guitar, all of a sudden I didn't just hear music and voice. I heard, well, there's an
Yeah.
electric guitar. Now it has distortion. That's an acoustic. That's the bass. You know, like it was just like wow, wow, wow. when it's like kind of hasn't stopped ever since.
Yeah, but it's so easy to forget that most people they don't hear those things. They just hear the voice. They just hear vocals, and then they hear the music underneath, and they don't even really. If you took the vocal off, they might not even recognize it a lot of the time. For that reason, I often find that playing my tracks to someone who isn't musical is a really good way of testing it. I like playing stuff to my wife because she loves music. She's got a really good taste in music. She's really diverse taste in music, and she's really honest. But she doesn't know everything that's going on in a track. She doesn't know all the different elements that are making up the whole thing. So I can play her something that I'm working on, and I'll just look for the emotional response, and she'll get excited or she'll look a bit puzzled. If she's looking puzzled, then I'm thinking, right, this isn't hitting the spot.
Yeah.
It needs to be doing something. But I think they're like non-musicians are like the most valuable people for getting feedback from, because if you send your track to another composer, they might be like an excellent guitarist, and they'll be analyzing for all the kind of detail in the guitar work, or like an orchestrator might be looking for, can a violin really do that, or can the orchestra, that you've got too many layers in there. Then it doesn't matter, because most people don't know that. They just want to, does it feel good when you listen to it? Does it take you somewhere? That's what matters.
Yeah, we get caught up in the details, and we'll say things like, it sounds like you should roll off the low end on that snare drum a little bit. Whereas somebody that doesn't have that will just say things like, I can't understand the words. You know, and then you're like, oh, that's important. Maybe I put too many effects on the vocals. So let me go fix that. And those,
or it might be that snare drum's getting in the way of the vocals, so that they might not know that's why they can't hear it properly.
Yeah, getting that kind of people like that have, and that's most people that will hear your music. They have this kind of big picture, you know, bird's eye view that we can often lose as, you know, people that are so caught up in the details all the time.
Definitely. I think jumping between different genres and listening to lots of different kinds of music really helps with that as well. Because if you do spend a lot of time listening to one genre, you can lose sight of that in a way. But for me, that kind of helps me get the macro view. I've been working on some dance music recently that it's kind of come to a halt because a temporary pause because my wife and I had a baby who was born 3.5 months ago. So he's keeping us pretty busy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then on top of that, I've been doing some work for some synth and keyboard work for a metal band that I used to listen to when I was younger, which is it's pretty awesome. So that's a completely different style of music, but I found going back to dance stuff, then I've got a different view on it. I'm not hearing all the little things that I was perhaps worrying about before. I'm hearing the tracks as a whole rather than the sum of all the different layers. And so yeah, just kind of hopping from listening to one thing to listening to something else and then go back to it. It definitely helps keep that kind of bird's eye view.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun and some totally different things to be working on.
Yeah.
Keeps it fresh.
Yeah, good to keep it fresh and stay challenged. I think that's it. If I mean, I'm challenged by most things I do musically, to be honest. It's always challenging.
I think we all are. I don't ever talk to anybody that tells me it's easy. No one has come on this. Even people you'd think haven't said, it's easy, man. Don't worry. You just, I just show up and there it happens.
No, literally every piece of music I start, I go through a long phase of thinking, who told me I was capable of doing this? Why am I doing this? Like, I'm awful. I just don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
this is all wrong. I bet everyone else is doing this at 10 times the speed that I'm doing it at, and I bet they would sound better as well. I go through that like every time I start something, and it's really frustrating. But even after like 12 years of doing it professionally, I still have not overcome that, and I think it's quite common though from what I've heard, and listening to your podcast as well, hearing other people say that like they kind of suffer from that imposter syndrome, I think is quite reassuring to hear.
Yeah, I feel bad for everyone too, because I know how painful it is. But I'm also happy that I'm not the only one. And
Same.
I've come to try, when I can remember, just try to remember that this is just part of the journey. This is like breaking a sweat in a workout or something. Like it's just gonna happen, and it has to happen. And just try to remember, I can get through this. I have gotten through it before, and I'll be better for it next time if I do. But still, then there's times where I'm just like, I can't even believe this. Who the hell do I think I am?
Yeah, that's the question I ask myself. I'm halfway into a track and I just think, who am I to be doing this? I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I get to the end of it, and it's like you said, it's part of the journey. It's like growing pains, I think. And that struggle, that discomfort means you're getting out of your comfort zone, and that means you're growing. So I guess it's like the no pain, no gain sort of thing in a way. It's exercising that creative muscle, and it kind of hurts while you're doing it. And if it doesn't hurt, then, and if it's not ever frustrating and it's always effortless and easy, then maybe there's room to push harder and try new things.
Increase the weight. Just like, I could curl this pen all day long. It's not going to do anything for me. So
exactly,
step it up.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, it's been great talking to you, man. I appreciate how generous you've been with your time, and especially your honesty and openness about what you do. And I think it was a really great discussion. I learned a lot, and
yeah, me too.
A lot of good takeaways, and I think it's really interesting to peek into this kind of like, it's a different world for me. So I've only had glimpses through people I talk to, but I appreciate you sharing that with us. And we can send people, if they want to check out Alibi, alibimusiclibrary.com.
I think it's now just alibimusic.com, actually.
Okay.
It used to be library. Yeah,
Yes.
we're now alibimusic.com.
All right, even better.
So yeah, check us out on there for an example of, just check out the music.
Any place to check out some of your work?
I am just terrible at social media,
That's fine.
to be honest. I do have a lot of
sure.
stuff on there, so if you type in my name on the Alibi site, you'll hear my stuff. I write exclusively for Alibi, really. Like I don't work for any other libraries, so all the stuff I do is with Alibi, and except for the sort of artist little projects that I'm doing on the side. So yeah, that's the best place to look, is alibimusic.com.
Right. Perfect.
But no, it's been awesome talking to you, and thanks so much for having me on the show. It's been really fun. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a great time. And thank you, the listener. We hope you guys have a great day.